Hey everyone, welcome to the Writer's Zone podcast, and thanks for joining us on the epic adventure we call writing. We're your hosts,
Holly Robilliard.
and Bob Adato. And Austin couldn't make it today, but we do have a spare special guest. We're going to be talking about plotting and pantsing with Ed Flora. How are you, Ed?
Doing well. How are you? Thanks for having me. Excited to be
Yeah,
here.
yeah, yeah. We're excited.
Welcome.
We're excited to have you here. Well, tell us about yourself. What do you got going on, Ed?
Well, I am a horror writer. I just put out my most recent novel, The Triangle Forest, about a year ago. I've been writing semi full time for about 8 years now. And yeah, I've always been creatively drawn to writing music in general, and currently working on a few projects right now. It's slow going because, balancing work and writing and life stuff. But making it work and
Nice.
having fun. So
Yeah. So what's triangle force? Is it triangle of no? What I got that wrong.
it's the Triangle Forest.
The triangle forest. Sorry about
Yes,
that.
yes,
I thought it was
yeah.
triangle of forest. I thought that was
No.
interesting, but that's my
Yeah.
mistake. But what's that about?
Yeah, so the Triangle Forest, it's a cosmic horror sci-fi adventure. It's a lot different than my first book, but it's basically about this alien substance deep in the woods, and there are several factions of people who kind of want control of this thing.
Oh,
Like
nice.
there's this fictional corporation who think of like an Apple or a Google, and like years ago they kind of found this thing and they're using it to make like smartphones, their own versions of like technology and that sort of thing. But
Nice.
it so this thing has kind of a mind of its own. It's sentient. So anybody who like has control of it, they're kind of like not necessarily possessed because it's not really a possession novel, but they're kind of at the mercy of whatever this alien thing has in store. There's like this cult who like worship this thing and they're like trying to protect it from people who want to use it. So there are a lot of moving parts, but it's fun. It gets very weird. I was watching like John Carpenter's The Thing. I had that in mind
Oh
when
yeah.
I was writing this, as well as like Stephen King's The Tommyknockers. So
Right.
it's this kind of like soup of these sci-fi horror things coming
Yeah.
together.
Yeah. Real quick, Ed, did you see the? I guess it's a sequel. I thought it was just a reboot. Did you see the sequel of the thing?
I haven't watched it yet.
Oh, actually, it's a
No.
prequel. I'm sorry. It takes place
Mhm.
before John Carpenter's the thing. But it's I
I
was
think it's
go
I
ahead.
think it's like the Swedish
Yeah.
crew.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
haven't watched it yet.
Yeah, it's really good. I was like, this is gonna, but it was decent. I loved
Mhm.
how yeah, they go and explore. I am going way off topic, but yeah, because in John Carpenter's the thing, they go and search the other crew's disaster
Yeah.
camp, as it were, and but now we see how all that happened in this
Mhm.
recent movie. It's very very fun. All
Nice.
right,
I gotta check it out. Yeah,
yeah,
love that
yeah,
stuff.
yeah. Okay, so sci-fi horror. Where can we find you? Where can we find the book?
So the book is available on Amazon. The audiobook is available as well on Audible. I'm on social media, Instagram at Edward J Flora. Same with TikTok. And I have a website as well. It's called gravesendbooks.com.
Hmm.
That's kind of like my imprint, my brand, if you will. You can reach me there. I have details and I have signed books for sale on there as well. And you could just reach out and say, hey, if you want. So,
Hey.
yeah.
Yeah, and I met Ed at StokerCon 2024 in San Diego, and you traveled all the way from New York, was it?
New York.
Like
Yeah.
upstate New York,
Yeah. Yeah. Westchester area.
Westchester. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh, and it's beautiful country out there. And Ed and was it Nancy? Or your partner?
Carly.
I am so sorry. Who's Nancy? I don't know.
It's okay. I
You,
don't know either.
we never want to know who Carly is, just for the
Yeah.
record. But Ed was fantastic. I mean, and we kind of have a mutual friend, and Michael.
Oh yeah, Christopher Michael Blake, who I
Yes,
met
Christopher
at
Michael Blake.
New Jersey Horror Con. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm going to have him on, and we're going to have him on later in August, I think it is. But
Nice.
yeah, but anyway, Ed was a great guy to talk to and just gonna hang out with because it was a little slow at the Stoker Con, so they're a
Mhm.
lot of fun. But so today we're gonna be talking about plotting and pantsing. Two different things. So who wants to explain what either one of those are? Like, because I always like pretend, like we need to pretend like not. It's not pretending. Actually, we have so many new writers that are just getting their feet wet, and So what is plotting and pantsing? Go for it. Whoever wants to jump in there.
I guess I can start. So plotting is basically when you're going through and you have your entire story outlined, what's going to be happening, when it's going to be happening, who's going to be doing the happening. um, and you have it all figured out. And so your characters are following that same storyline that you figured out from them. There's no room for deviation, unlike my characters who just do whatever they want. And so you have that strict plot that you're following the entire time. Whereas pantsing is, again, like you're kind of flying on the seat of your pants. Austin is notorious for this, I know. So it's too bad he's not here, because he just, sits down and he'll just whoop like right through. And you're just creating as you're going. And so you don't really have an idea of what's going to be happening until it happens. So yeah, anything to add to that, you guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's yeah, I love the idea of being a pantser. My first big influence in writing and just being a fan of the genre is Stephen King, and he's notorious for not knowing where the story's gonna go. So when I set out to write my first novel, I think I started in like 2016 or 2017. I didn't even know what plotting and pantsing was. I was just like, I know this is what Stephen King does, so this is what I'm gonna do.
Yeah.
And it kind of shows in that first book. But uh, at this point, I would say I'm kind of a combination of both myself. Especially with the Triangle Forest, I had an idea of what I wanted to say at the beginning of that book. And I had that foundation and I kind of went with it. A lot of things changed along the way, but at least having an idea of what I wanted to say, I feel like it helped me put together a more cohesive novel than my first one.
Yeah. I'm Holly. You're a pantsing, or what do you do?
I do a combination of both. So I like to outline. I like to have a general idea, kind of what's going to be happening at what point in the story. And I also like to go through and like separate my chapters so I know what's going to happen in each chapter. But with that being said, I do allow my characters probably a little too much free reign to do whatever they please, which results in a lot of extra editing on my part. But it's nice because then, sometimes I'll write out a chapter and be like, this would actually be really good from this person's perspective instead, as I'm going through and writing it. And so being a combination of both just gives me that freedom instead of like strictly being like, no, I said I was going to write it from this person's POV, so that's what I'm doing. And it's nice because, sometimes I'll have an extra chapter in there because just, I think about it, and as I'm working, I'm like, oh, it would be really great if this character did this, or it'd be really great if this happened. So I keep that freedom. So
yeah. Yeah, and then I'm pretty much a pantser. I think my first book, I wrote my first book and published it, self-published a couple of years ago, and 2021 was first book. But same as you, Ed, I started writing, like I started really like looking at stuff in 2018, because I've written stories for myself. I've done that most of my life, and then all of a sudden I'm like, hey, what if I actually tried to put something together and made it all official? But I think just the excitement for me kept me from like plotting, and I think I'm with you. Like I don't even know what plotting or pantsing. It was just I just wanted to write a story, and here's my ideas, and here it goes, kind of a thing. But the more podcasts I listened to and books I read, started becoming like, oh, there's actually like a thing. And Ed, exactly like you, I read Stephen King's On Writing, which I highly recommend to anybody. It's definitely not about horror. It's just about writing. So please pick that up. But he does talk about both, and he is a pantser. And to me, it just made sense for me. Like I feel more comfortable exploring. I think that's another term for it, right? Like an explorer writer, or something like that. I think Austin actually had something else I'd never heard for like a gardener, or I don't remember what it was, but But maybe that was his own. Maybe that's an Austinism or something. He came up with his own thing. But yeah, pantsing is just, it feels a lot more natural for me because and I don't know if it's my ADD brain that gets. I have no idea, but it's hard to just sit there and talk about, okay, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter. Now that being said, I have found the way my writing style, as in pantsing, gets in the way of the actual plot. Like, we're kind of like we're all talking about, we're going to run into problems, right? Because all of a sudden you're halfway through the book and you're like, whoa, wait a second. Things aren't lining up as they should. And with me writing, there's always going to be a twist at my books. Well, probably most of ours. It's going to be a twist at the end. You kind of have to plan for that. You know what I mean? Like something, you know what I mean? Like you need to start planting some seeds in there. My character is pretty much Sherlock Holmes. Her name is Sherlyn Coyle Holmes. So she goes with her middle name. But she's like, she's a detective. So like there needs to be I have to do something, but I need to do a little bit of plotting just to make things easier on me. Is that the same for you guys? Like when you're writing out, the story? Because you don't want to get to the end and go, well, crap, I have to.
Where am I now? Like hit a
Yeah.
wall. Yeah, for sure. And the idea of being a plotter 100%, it really just makes my corporate minded brain happy, because like
Oh, okay.
I've been working a corporate job for like 10 years now, and just having that level of organization, if I could apply that to writing, just really sounds great to me. If I could sit down and just do a book a year, that sounds great. But naturally, I feel like I need the characters to kind of take over. When I start a book, I kind of have the idea first of kind of the situations, and then the characters kind of follow. So the characters kind of step on the scene, and it's like, okay, go react to the things that are happening. You know what I mean? Like in Triangle Forest, when the sci-fi stuff is happening, it's like, okay, how are the characters going to react to this? So um, I think being a pantser, you kind of benefit that kind of style, having the characters react.
Mm.
But I would love to just be a plotter and just be more organized. But I don't know. My brain doesn't really allow it. I know Philip Fracassi, he Boys in the Valley. He is a plotter through and through, from what I understand. But yeah, I just can't imagine being that rigid, I
Yeah.
guess. Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, it's so when I first started writing, I started originally working on The Blood Sky, which is the first in a trilogy. So obviously with a trilogy, I know they're all connected, and so I know that certain things need to be happening. And so with that one, I actually, I've done extensive planning and plotting on that one. Um, extensively outlined it. It also, so then we we decided we were all going to start I was going to start a new project last November, just for fun. And so then I switched over and started writing Heartbound. But because, we decided kind of to do this like a month before, I think it was the beginning of October, we decided we were going to do this. And so I didn't have as much time to plan with that one. So it was really interesting to be able to experience kind of more of like the pantsing side of things. It was fun. It was a little scary. I still did some like rough outlining, so I still kind of knew where things were where they were gonna go. But it was like you said, I just kind of had the idea and I just ran with it. But now that I've finished writing that one and I've switched over to writing The Blood Sky again, I'm like, ooh, back to the planning. This is so nice. Like, I like this. I feel so
That's
much more
funny.
organized.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a good friend who's a bestseller, and she writes historical romance. And we've talked about this, and she plots heavily. Like she spends a couple of months plotting out her book. So she knows exactly how her characters are going to react, and so it is very rigid, like what you're talking about. But the benefit I feel from that writing is like when you're done with the book, your first draft, it's going to be pretty clean because like you've
Mhm.
already. I mean, I almost feel like anyone or you guys or anyone else can tell me if I'm wrong, but it almost feels like your whole plotting out. If you're a plotter, you're plotting everything out, and that almost feels like your first draft, like because
Mhm.
like how everything is going to go. You just have not put the words in there, and then when you go back through it, I mean, like when you're done with the book, then it's almost like it's an
Mhm.
official first draft, but you're done with it. But there are definitely some benefits to plotting. It's just I just can't do it.
Yeah, definitely. And that's something that I experienced too when I was doing um when I was working on Heartbound, is that after I had gone through my first draft, there was just, enough plot holes that I had to go back through and, it was like rewriting chapters and adding chapters and things like that to help make that storyline actually make sense because, again, it wasn't really planned out. So things just weren't lining up the way that I had hoped that they would. And so that was something that obviously took a lot more time than I had expected, is having to do that extra editing
Mhm.
um, to make it all make sense.
Hmm.
Which I hope it still does.
Yeah.
We'll find out when it gets released in a couple of months. My beta readers are going through it right now, so I should be getting some feedback here, and we'll see if I just totally lost it on that one.
Oh.
It might be a planner for life after this.
Yeah, you need to plot this out better.
This question actually just occurred to me, and I'm curious, for both of you. Do you work on more than one project at a time, or is it just the current work in progress? Is that your sole focus?
For me, I need to stick with one project at a
Mm.
time.
Okay.
So just for fun, I just finished up book 4. I just sent it off to my formatter. I'll get it back probably today or tomorrow. I've set a release date of August 20th for Eye of Eternity, Coil and Fang, Eye of Eternity, book 4. But there's still some more stuff for me to do, some marketing for that, ARC readers and all that. But just now, I'm toying with the idea of kind of starting on a different side project. But I can't. I apologize for my dogs. I do that every podcast. So somebody just walks by the window across the street, minding their own business, and my dogs are letting me know we're in danger of death. But
It's okay. Inevitably, my dog will do the same.
Well, this is going to be off topic, and sorry to interrupt you, Bob, but
no, go ahead.
Ed, you have a husky mix, is that right?
Yes. Yep.
Is
Kona.
is Kona a talker, like one of the husky talkers?
So she doesn't articulate the way some huskies do on Instagram, but she howls.
Yeah.
And she has a whole bunch of personality.
Oh yeah.
4:30 will come around and she'll look at me and like it's dinner time and I'll say, "You're early." And then she'll give me that look and just grumble. It's so
Mhm.
funny.
I was looking at pictures of her. She's so cute. I
Oh,
actually have an all white husky,
yeah.
who looks a lot like her. And so, but she is like, she's the same thing. She's just like an absolute ball of energy. And she's like, she knows that she goes
Mhm.
for a WALK.
Yeah.
And she knows that she goes for one as soon as we're done eating. And
Mhm.
it's like, but now she's gotten to the point where it's like the second that fork goes down, she's like,
It's
like
time.
waiting, like just staring at you. And
Yeah.
gosh, I'll tell you, if it is like raining or something outside and like we're not going that night, she'll progress from just staring at me, and then she'll jump up on the couch, and then she'll like sit beside me, and then she'll like put her whole body in front of me, like just
Yep.
so obnoxious.
Oh, I love
That's
it. I love
hilarious.
it. I know this too well.
Yeah.
But Bob,
Huskies aside,
you
I
were
don't.
saying you are, wait, so it's coming back from the formatter.
Yeah, coming back in some marketing, but yeah. So now I'm toying around with the idea of starting on another project, but I can't. Ed, that's a great question. How about you, Holly?
Um, Not really. I can't write two separate stories at once. Um, I will constantly be thinking about both of them, and as I'm
Mhm.
having ideas for both of them, I will keep track of those ideas separately. So when I was working on Heartbound, I was still kind of writing some quotes and ideas and things like that down for the Blood Sky separately. But it wasn't until I had completely finished writing Heartbound that I transitioned back to working on the Blood Sky, because it's too hard for me, I think, and I didn't want the character, like the vibes of my characters from Heartbound, to cross over into the
That
Blood
makes sense.
Sky. Even though the books are actually like linked in a small way, but I just wanted to make sure that I was keeping those characters separate.
Yeah. Oh, you Ed, you write on 15 books at a time, or what are you doing?
I'm trying not to let it get that out of control. Previously, I was only working on one book at a time. So when I was writing my debut, Ropes in the Attic, I was only working on that. And when I was working on Triangle Forest, I was only working on that. But now, my third book, it's a folk horror. Now that that one is kind of done, it's in its third draft. I just got feedback from my editor. I have been working on a couple of separate projects. And I do feel like they are different enough so that way there's not like, things are getting hazy, crossover, that sort of thing. One is like a psychological thriller. Another one, so I just recently discovered splatterpunk, and I think it's very cool.
What's splatterpunk?
So splatterpunk is kind of like extreme horror.
Like
kind
Texas
of like
Chainsaw Massacre or something like that?
Yeah, like I don't know if you've heard of like Aaron Beauregard, like Daniel Volpe, like those folks. It's just violence and gore, like to the extreme. And so so there's this idea that I've had for a while, and I know that I've wanted to combine this other thing that I love with horror for the longest time, but I haven't had an idea of how I wanted to tackle that. And so I recently discovered splatterpunk, and I'm like, this would fit perfectly with this thing. So I have started outlining it, and I do have a series in mind for it, kind of like an episodic thing. And they'll be shorter novels. They'll be like 120 pages each or something like that. But I want to do like 5 or 6 of them. So I have started like outlining them, and I kind of see myself plotting this thing from start to finish before actually writing. So it's going to be a lot different than anything I've written before in terms of content and in terms of how I'm tackling it. So I'm very excited to kind of dive into that. But my main focus right now is finishing the folk horror, as well as like the psychological thriller, because those are much more far along. But they're all in different stages of doneness. The folk horror is like draft 3. The thriller is draft 1, kind of like writing and all that. And then I'm just outlining this like splatter punk series that I have going on. So very busy, but I don't know. I like knowing that I have projects to
Like
dive
waiting.
into. Yeah, because one of the things that not really being like sad about it, but just when one book is done and I don't have something in progress, I get like very antsy. So I do like the idea that I have something to jump into as soon as like the new one is published.
Now let's say I kind of the same as you, I guess. I don't work like start writing kind of like what Holly said too. Like I don't start writing my other books yet because I don't want to kind of mix the two up. So I'm exactly the same, but I will, and I definitely will, or I have worked on like small out like a page or two of what I want the story to be about, what who the characters are, that kind of thing. Yes, I do that. And it's exactly what you're talking about. Like I get this book idea and I'm like, okay, I need to start writing this up real quick. And then I put it on some paper and I'll put it I use Google Docs, so I'll put it in there labeled book ideas, and then I'll come back to it later and then pick from there. Now I have a question for you, Ed, because you just talked about being Panther, but then you just said I'm outlining this whole series. So what's why are you outlining all that, or why did you go in that direction?
Yeah, I mean, this is the first time that I'm really going to be doing something like this. And when I figured out that this is what I want to do, that I wanted to be a multi-book series, um, I wanted it to be episodic, like each book will be leading up towards like a final book. And so I feel like plotting it ahead of time will be the most efficient way. And I feel like because these are going to be shorter books, I kind of don't want them to get out of control or bloated.
Okay.
I want them to follow a single thread, maybe a single character, and be more precise with it.
Hmm.
Um, because with the Triangle Forest, I had almost, I don't want to say too many threads, but there were a lot of characters. There was a lot to balance. And for this series, I don't want these to be more than 120 pages each.
Yeah.
So I think plotting will help me keep it at that length.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you ever when you're writing horror, do you ever like have like creatures or anything like that, or is all of your horror more like psychological and um
Um, so for the Triangle Forest, creatures found their way in, and I do feel like I gravitate towards like creature feature type stuff. It's a lot of fun. But I am writing, like I said, the psychological thriller, which I'm trying to keep as grounded in reality as possible. Just because I'm a fan of multiple genres, I
Mhm.
love horror for that reason, that it can go as
Yeah.
crazy as you want it to be, or it could be as grounded as you want it to be.
Yep.
Like, Stephen King's Misery,
Oh gosh. Yeah.
there's just so much or so little that you could do and it still be effective. So I am working on another book that um, it's primarily two characters and it's just like two people like isolated in like a gas station at night, and it's just like one person who's like working this overnight shift, and then this other person who's like kind of sketchy and he keeps showing up at the gas station. It's just like just total Reaper vibes and that sort of thing. And it's like that could be horror too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as much as I love the supernatural and the creature stuff, like Dark Tower is one of my favorite things of all time.
Mhm.
Um, I do want to challenge myself and kind of like, okay, what if I limit what I have to work with? Like, what
Mhm.
can I produce in that scenario?
Mm.
Yeah, that's
Nice.
really cool. I love like I'm a huge Halloween fan. Anything that's horror, like I've
Yes.
always been that way. Even when I was like a kid, like a tiny little child, my dad loves Halloween and horror. So I
Mm.
grew up as a terrified child watching scary movies, which I love. And so like it's funny because I don't read a lot of horror anymore. Um, but I still love it. Like, and even for me, like when I was writing my fantasy book, I was like, I want to have creatures that are scary and gross because that is just what I love. Like, that's my favorite thing about horror. But you're right. Like, it's amazing how, how wide the genre is and how much you can do with it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So it's really cool.
Mm. Well, I think that's a very successful point that you're making, Ed, about if you're going to make a series, you should probably plot it out. That sounds brilliant. I
Mhm.
did not do that. Like I said, I started writing book one and I just pantsed it. And then I'm like,
Yeah.
I love these characters so much, I'm going to write more. And so I know the overarching, not a theme, but story is for Coyle to find and apprehend Jack the Ripper, who happens to be Moriarty from the
Mhm.
Sherlock Holmes stories. But yeah, I'm going to end it up on book five
Mhm.
later this year. I'm going to start that up. Um, and it would make sense. Like, so, and this is going to be my don'ts when it's time for don'ts, but this will be mine. Like, yeah, you really should plan or plot this thing out way
Mhm.
better because I keep writing myself like these crazy cliffhangers. I mean, I wrap all the stories up in each book, but I'll entice readers with an epilogue, like
Mhm.
another 3 chapters of epilogue, and then like so that gets us into the next book. But then I have to sit there and go, okay, how am I going to make that happen? Like, spoil it. Well, I won't spoil it too much. I know I probably have like 8 readers out there, but for those
That's
eight,
the spirit.
and for the two that are actually listening. But yeah, I mean, I made somebody out. My editor asked me a question regarding the ending, and I was like, "Wow, I never thought of that. Let me look into that." So now I'm gonna have like it's like kind of an ending on a time travel situation in this book, book 4, and now I'm gonna have their children, their adult children, in the next book. So now I have to wrap all that up. How did all these? How did all that happen? Right? Because and it's gonna be set in present day. I mean, my books take place in 1892, and now it's gonna be present day. How do we get to present day, and how do they all have adult children? So I'm gonna have to figure that out. But Ed is doing the smart thing. Less headaches, right? What is fun about that, Ed? What is fun about plotting?
Well, I don't know if it's going to work out just yet.
Yeah.
This is kind of like the goal I have for next year in starting this series. I do foresee it going off the rails a little bit because, especially the genre, I feel like splatterpunk doesn't necessarily lend itself to plotting. Um, it is a little bit more like off the cuff. So, I think in terms of plotting, I'm hoping my goal is to have an overall idea of what I want the series to be and what I want each book to be.
Mm,
And then once we get a little bit more into the micro, I think I'll, let it do its thing. But
yeah,
I do want to keep it as tight as possible and not go too off the rails. But,
yeah,
you know, um, the 3 books that I have completed so far, each of them have to some extent. So we'll see. I
yeah.
guess, the series is a way of challenging myself to write in a different style and kind of see what comes of it.
Ooh, I like that. I
Yeah.
like that. You can really grow. You know what I mean? Like as writers, right? Because
Mhm.
I mean, I feel like I would probably do that too because I have multiple genres going on in my head. This is steampunk that I'm finishing up. Holly knows about my next series. It's going to be urban fantasy, and then but I have high fantasy going on in my head. I have horror short stories going on in my head. I have thriller. So yeah, there's no. But I like how you kind of worded that. Like you're kind of pushing your own boundaries
Mhm.
instead of being like, and there's nothing wrong with this if you happen to write cozy fantasy or something like that, and that's all you do, and you're happy. Well, that's fantastic. That's great. And I'm not saying you're not growing, but some of us, because we're all new writers here. Ed's written a couple books. I've written 4. Holly's writing her first, but even if I've got 10 on my belt, I'm still new, and I'm still
Yeah.
gonna learn stuff.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah, I think,
absolutely.
sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying that that's absolutely true. I think that every time you write a book, you grow as a writer and you learn a little bit more about yourself and your own personal style, and um changing that style is okay as well, right? If you want to try something different, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I did read another book by Chuck Wendig called Gentle Writing Advice, similar to Stephen King's On Writing, where it's
Mm.
just, general writing advice. And I think he brought up in that book that each new project is going to be written in a different way.
Mm.
So there's no standard when it comes to writing each book. Like, every time you start this new project, it's going to unfold in a different way than your previous one did.
Okay.
Um, like the outline and the way that I approached the Triangle Forest is totally different from the way I approached this new one. Your research is going to be different every time.
Mhm.
Your Hopefully your characters are going to be different every time. Otherwise you're just kind of writing the same book
Mm.
um, over and over again, and you don't want to do that.
Right.
Um, yeah, and that's a great book. I do recommend checking that one out too, because for writers who have full-time jobs too, um, it's it's good to know that people have been there
Mhm.
before.
Mm.
Um, 'Cause, the writing process is a lonely one. So to know that, there are people out there that you can relate to and going through the same struggles, it's good. It feels good to know that,
Yeah,
to be validated.
yeah, that we're not the only ones struggling with,
Yeah.
right? And I think Stephen King said don't use the thesaurus, but I'm sorry, I use that about every other
Yes,
chapter, or I'm sorry, not even chapter, every other paragraph I'm looking through the thing.
I
for sure.
love my thesaurus.
Yeah.
I pull it out for everything. Oh my goodness. Actually, it's really funny. This is off topic, I guess, but my husband was working on some reports for work, and he was reading me what one of the things he had written in the report. And he's like, what's a better way to say this? And I'm like, let me go get my thesaurus. Like, hold on, hold that thought.
That's great. Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
you use that, it's like hot sauce. You just use that thing for everything.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Use that. One thing we haven't really talked about too much is we got plotting and pantsing, but there's also something called plantsing, where a little bit of both. And I feel like we all probably, because I don't necessarily just sit here and go, well, what's Coil going to do now? Like, so my planting looks like I'll write out like 2 sentences. Okay, so chapter 2, we find Coil in the study and she's thinking about Ronan. Boom, and I'll start it up. So that's what my planting was. It's very, very simple. It allows me to explore what else is happening or what else is going to happen. But how about you guys? Everyone does else? Or, man, I cannot talk today. I'm sorry. How about planting?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah. I think, that's a good way of describing this hybrid place that we kind of sit in, not 100% plotting, but also kind of letting the characters and the story do its own thing. This my folk horror, which is going to be my 3rd book, I think that's what I fell into in writing that one. I had what I called a living, breathing outline with this one. So I had the outline and I outlined 3 chapters ahead of my current spot.
Okay.
So wherever I left off in this chapter, I'm like, okay, this, and this needs to happen in the next 3 chapters. And then from there, I would kind of rinse and repeat, then do the next 3 chapters and say, okay, what needs to happen for the next 3. And I did that for the whole book, and I think it worked pretty well. I just got feedback from my editor about a month ago, and there were some structural changes that needed to happen, some rearranging, but for the most part, everything was where it needed to be. So I was very happy to know that. Yeah.
I love in books when something happens, like, or like when you learn about something, or a character is like pulls something out of the bag, right? And then you look back and you're like, oh my gosh, like I should have seen that coming. Like they clearly, like, you can tell that they were planning something like 10 chapters ago, and now they've done it. And like at the time you don't think anything of it, but once you're like, oh gosh, like how did I miss it, right? And I love that. And so that's why I try and do a lot of planning, is so that I can have those moments, so that I know, like, looking ahead, if that's going to happen, then how can I hint about it now? But I also, it's really funny because when people find out that I write, they're like, oh, how do you think of all the things that are happening in a chapter? Like, if you know that this has to happen in the chapter, that's one thing, but like, how do you fill a chapter with all this stuff? And I'm like, I have no idea. I don't know. I have no idea how it happens. It's just like I sit there and then it just is on the screen all of a sudden, right? Because I let those characters, do their own thing and have these conversations and, try and put myself into their head as I'm writing it. And so I'm like, if I was sitting there having this conversation, what would I be doing? What would I be looking at? Would I be interested in something going on outside of the window instead of paying attention to the person that's talking to me? Things like that. And that's, I think, where my planting comes in, is just letting those characters, again, just do as they please.
Love it. That's so funny because with this 3rd book, I remember distinctly the writing process for the Triangle Forest. I remember when I started it. I remember exactly the pain points and the wins throughout that whole process. But this book, when I got my feedback, I'm like, when did I write this book? Like, when did this all happen? it's one of those things where it's just like the characters kind of just took over. And so this was also the first time that I kind of created a fictional town, because I always loved the idea of like a Castle Rock or Dairy, and like something that's like uniquely yours. So this time
Mhm.
I kind of set out and did that myself.
Hmm.
And it's so cool because it has its own personality, and then it kind of just ran amok in a way. Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like as far as planning all this out, I know that like I'm gonna have to start planning out what this my last book is about, book 5. I mean, I kind of have an idea, but I do like take like the bigger kind of, for me, the big exciting parts and write that out. Um,
Mm.
Maybe a paragraph or something like that, and then I'll kind of spread those in my mind. I actually, it'd probably make way more sense if I were to use, those post-its or something like that, which people do all the time. We had Rain Sullivan on. She's a writer, and she's got like a huge whiteboard full of different colored. I mean, it's
Yeah.
amazing, and it looks like it makes fantastic sense. But I don't know if I could do that. But in my mind, I start putting them together. Like, okay, I got this big part. I have this big part. What happens in between? You know what I mean? Now I have to fill all those spaces. Does that make sense? Do you guys do that too?
Yeah, for sure. Sometimes I'll have like this big event that happens in the book, and it's like, okay, how do I get here? So sometimes I'll write things out of order, and I'm like, okay, like I want to
Yeah.
write this big, exciting scene.
Yeah.
How do we get to this? And so going back to the beginning, rewrites and kind of planting the seeds that kind of lead up to that big event.
Yeah.
I think you can also like reverse. So I plot first and then I pants. But you could also, if you're just starting out, and this is something I had another writer reach out to me about, and he's like, I kind of have like a general idea of like, I have this thing that I know I want to happen. He's like, but I don't know where to go. Like, I don't even know how to start. And you can always start by pantsing first, and you can go through and like just randomly write like a few things out and then go back later and be like, okay, now I've got all these random ideas. How do I connect them? And then you can outline it from there as well. So I think you could do it either way, which is really cool. It's just, again, growing as a writer, being flexible as a writer, and just remembering that just because somebody does it one way does not mean that that way is going to work for you.
Yeah. That's a great point. Yeah. And I know for me, I'll feel stupid because like I'm writing, right? And I'll get stuck on a plot hole or something. Something will get me stuck, and I'm like, well, great. Well, how is she supposed to react this way when this happened over here? And I'm trying to figure it out, and I'm like, well, wait, I'm the writer. I can do whatever I want, actually. Like, that doesn't have to happen over here in chapter 2. I can just change it up, or God, I'm like an idiot. But it takes me too long to remember. Like,
yeah, it's easier said than done.
yeah, like 3.
Yeah,
So,
that was something so once I finished writing Heartbound, and it's gone through I think 3 rounds of edits now. I like kind of set it aside for a little bit, and then I have, now that I've sent out all of my beta reads, I sat down and I got it on my Kindle, and I've been going through and just reading it myself and highlighting and making some changes and stuff. And it's really interesting as well as you're going through, because you see those things and you're like, what was I thinking when I wrote this? Like, why is it like this? Why is this character doing this? This doesn't even make any sense.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's so funny to go back and see stuff like that, because again, you're like, I mean, at least that you can change it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's like, something that happens in the beginning of the book. I realized that the one girl says something, but then almost at the end of the book, which is like a huge twist in the story, I'm like, but the twist doesn't even make sense because she already said it at the beginning of the book. And I'm like, now what am I going to do? And I'm like, oh, I can just take it out. Like, I can just take it out.
Yeah. Writing's hard, guys. We don't
Yeah.
suggest it. Do something else with your life.
I will say, speaking of writing being hard, is that if anyone is struggling to get through your first book and you still want to keep writing, and you have other book ideas, is the second book is so much easier. And I
Mm,
think it's because you get that confidence of knowing that you just finished the first one.
that's true.
And again, like I mean, I have my release date set and stuff like that for October 10th. And the book is officially up for pre-order on Amazon now, the ebook, which is
Yay.
really
Cool.
exciting.
Cool.
But it's like having, now that I am starting to write The Blood Sky again, I feel so much more confident because I
Mhm.
know that I pushed through and I finished that first one.
Yep.
And so just remember that, guys, if you're struggling to get through the first book, but you still like really have all these other great book ideas, just push through and finish it. You can always go back and edit it, and you're going to feel a lot better writing your next book after you've written that first one.
Absolutely.
So,
Amen.
and
Wow,
that again
appreciate-
comes back to a conversation we had, I think, on one of our earlier podcasts about how people always recommend that you write some short stories before you write a novel, which I did not do. I just jumped right in and wrote a book.
Why not? Why not?
Now I know why. Now I know why they say that. Half of it is because you just build up that trust in yourself and that confidence in yourself to finish it.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah, that's so relatable. Like I look back on my first book, which I have taken off of Amazon just because I'm like, oh, it doesn't really reflect like where I'm at right now as a writer. I do plan on like rewriting it, re-releasing it, and all that stuff. But it's so true that once you get over that hurdle of the first book, the second one, you're like, I can actually do this. I could, write, a
Yeah.
full story and like publish it. Like this is attainable.
Yeah.
And I very much think of like I relate writing to music. I have like a music minded brain. I was in a band for quite a while, and it's like you have these things to say. You have these a vision of what you want your art to be, and the same goes for like music. If you know what you want it to sound like, but if you don't know the fundamentals, if you don't know what scales are, if you don't know what the chords are, you're not going to be able to achieve your vision. So it's important to use those tools to get the words on paper.
Makes
Just
sense.
grammar and structure and, dialogue, all of those
Yeah.
things. The more you do it, the better you'll get at it. World building, like just the description of your environment, because I like really atmospheric type stories where you could like feel like you're in the environment with the characters. And the more you do it, the more you describe those settings, the better you get at it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Nice. Ed, I wanted to ask you kind of a side question. You talked about your editor. Is your editor like a horror themed editor, or is it just like are they just like a normal editor or everyday? I don't
I
know.
think she does a little bit of both. I think primarily she works in fantasy,
Hmm.
which is adjacent to horror. There is a lot of crossover,
Okay.
which I feel like it also like her feedback has helped elevate my writing, in terms of that, because there is a lot of like world building and character stuff in the fantasy genre. So her feedback has really helped me
Yeah.
kind of see the bigger picture.
That's good.
For my last two books. Yeah,
Hmm.
been vital in
Okay.
getting better as a writer.
God,
It's
I
actually,
know. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, it's
Yeah, go
actually,
ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
it's really funny as well that you say that, like with the crossover, because I mean, I think fantasy has really become like a big thing recently. Whereas when I was younger, which feels like a long time ago now, when I was younger, fantasy wasn't as big and horror was. So, when you would think about horror, you would think about like vampires and werewolves and things like that. And now that we've had this big push of fantasy, I almost like no longer associate those things with horror. I think of, vampires and stuff like that as fantasy.
In fantasy, yeah.
Yeah. And so like there is that huge crossover. It's almost like fantasy kind of came out of horror in a way, which is really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, Ed, I mean, we're approaching our time limit, but like you were touching on stuff. I'm like, man, I want to talk about that. That is freaking fantastic. But I just thought of something too. What about horror fantasy? There's got to be a thing, right? Horror
Yeah, I
fantasy?
mean, the only thing that I could think of is the Dark Tower,
Okay. Okay.
I am desperate for like a horror fantasy. If you have recommendations, or if anybody has recommendations, I'm open to it, because I'm
Yeah.
constantly reading. And so I would love a series that's just fantasy horror, a big epic sprawling story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
wonder how different it would be from like grimdark
Mm.
or grim fantasy. Because I just finished up Joe Abercrombie's First Kingdom series. I don't remember. It was his first series, 3 books trilogy.
Is it The Blade itself?
Yeah. That one.
Yeah, okay.
And
I did read The Blade itself earlier in the year, and I do plan on reading the rest of that series.
yeah,
Grimdark, it just really seems like something I would love, so I'm trying to
yeah,
get into that a little bit too.
yeah. But I wonder if it's the same. I don't know.
Mm.
That's something we got to explore next time we have you on it.
Yeah, I would
Def-
love to come back.
yeah.
Yeah.
Horror fantasy guys. If listeners, if you've got any recommendations, let us know because there has to be. I don't know why I'm thinking of Anne Rice. In the back of my mind, I'm thinking Anne Rice has done something similar,
Yeah.
but I can't quite place it right now. But anyway, well, here's time for our don'ts.
Mm.
Time for our don'ts as far as plotting and pantsing, and I'm gonna go ahead and start because it's been on the tip of my tongue ever since. And I'm gonna go ahead, yeah, because I'll wait and somebody else will jump in, like take mine, like great, now I can't, now I have to think of a new one, and it's difficult. And then we had one guest, Ed, because you're included in this, because one time we had, and they're like, oh, I'm supposed to have one too, like, yeah, we're not just gonna. No,
If
you're
we have to
first,
suffer
actually.
through this, you do too.
Yeah. Yeah, we're gonna suffer, all of us together.
Suffer through our don'ts.
Yeah. So don't. So mine was, and I've learned this from experience, that if you're gonna write a series, which we all do all the time, especially a first-time writer, like, oh, I'm gonna write 12 books on this. Plot that thing out. Do not pants it. Okay. Do not pants a series because it really, really helps to have, from book 1 to book for me to book 5, finding and chasing after Ronan Moriarty. Book 5, he's gonna get caught. Okay, but like plan all this stuff out, and it just saves you so much time and so much headache. Now within each book, I think Holly alluded to it, like, she kind of writes out like what this is going to be, and then okay, now I can go exploring for the rest of the chapter. But yeah, so Ed, he talked about it first. He's going to do this, or he says he hopes now, or he's plotting out the entire series. That is brilliant. So please do that. Don't pants your series. That's mine. The end.
Yeah, that's awesome. I couldn't agree more. I guess for my personal don'ts, I guess it's kind of related to that, but more so just not rushing. Because, and especially not looking at, other authors in terms of like output. Because I think it would be very easy to like look at this person, like, oh, they're putting out a book a year, or they're putting out 2 books a year. If your book is taking you 2 years to write, then take 2 years to write your book.
Yep.
Because that's when mistakes are made. And when I was reaching the tail end of finishing my first book, I was like, oh my god, I have like 50,000 words, like it's a full book, let me put this thing out. And putting it out when it's not ready, that's one thing that I think I would change if I would start over. But yeah, I think just, focus on your story and make it be the best thing that it can be, and not rush. Because that's, I think, most important.
Well said.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say, don't be afraid to do a combination of planning and pantsing, and don't be afraid to let those characters run free. I know it's really interesting. I have this conversation a lot with people, and especially with like non-writers, because they don't really understand that these characters can actually take on a mind of their own. Because they're like, you're the writer, how do you not know what they're doing? And I'm like, I don't know. It's something I can't explain to myself either. But that's, whether you want to pants first and then go and take those ideas and plan later, or if you want to do like I do, which is plan it out and then pants in between the chapters. again, you can always go back and edit if things don't make sense. I hope
Mhm.
that you're going back and editing your book at some point before you release it, but to each their own. But yeah,
Mhm.
I don't be afraid to do a little combination of both, because I think it's really rewarding.
Yeah.
Mhm.
How about like this? Like I just thought of this when you're talking. Like we're taking our dog to the. We all have dogs. Take our dog to the bog dark, to the dog park, and we get out of the car and they're on a leash, and we get to the dog park where it's gated, safe, and then we take the leash off and let them run free.
Mhm.
So let's do that with our stories. How's that sound?
That's a great analogy.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
That's amazing.
That's
Yes, I love that.
Holly gave that to me. Let them run free. I was like toddlers. Like no, you don't let toddlers run free ever.
Well, I was thinking about that yesterday for one of my, as I'm starting to try and like market my book and things like that. I was thinking about some reels for social media, and that was one of my things, was that your characters are like children.
Mm,
They never listen to you. They
right.
think that they know better than you.
Yeah.
And it's like until something happens, and then they're like, oops, please help.
Yeah. I feel like in horror, yeah, they're all gonna die at the end or something like that. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
That would be Austin's input right now, is that if you have a character that's not listening to you, just kill them off.
Yeah. Yeah. This guy's getting annoying.
Kill
I
them
love
off.
it when characters get an attitude or if they're sarcastic, especially like in ridiculous situations or supernatural situations. Like, different characters are going to react in different ways. And if they're like kind of snarky about it, I love that.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's awesome. All right, so we need to have you back for horror fantasy. So we'll all write a horror fantasy. We'll all come back together and have Ed on again. So once again, where can we find you, Ed?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram and TikTok at Edward J Flora. And then gravesendbooks.com if you want just a little bit of detail about what I'm doing, or if you want a signed book, they're on there. And
Okay.
yeah, my social is always open. I like to do fun challenges on TikTok and just be goofy and silly and just talk about books and have fun. So yeah, hope to see you there.
And just for clarification for our podcast listeners, Ed's last name is spelled Flora, Flora. Just exactly like flora and fauna. Exactly, right?
Yep, exactly.
All right.
Thank you.
Well,
That makes me oh my gosh, that makes me think of Adam's Family right away. Because that's what the twins' names were. The conjoined twins was Flora and Fauna. So thank
that's
you.
right.
Oh my gosh.
That's what that reminds me of.
Yeah. So Ed's related to that. So no, that was fun.
Indeed.
Yeah. Ed, it was fantastic. That time flew by. It just went by way too quick for us. But we have to have you on again.
Thank you.
That's okay, right?
Thank you so
We
much.
bother you again?
I'll definitely be back. Hopefully the new book will be out next year. So
Nice.
I'm more than open to joining it. I appreciate you guys making the time for me. This was a blast. Thank you.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming. It was really fun.
Yeah. Please go out and not just to buy Ed's books, but all of our books, and we'll love you even more.
Yes.
But yes. But so don't forget to subscribe to our channels at the links below so you don't miss any of the Writer's Room content. We always love to hear from our listeners. So if you have any questions or topics you want us to dive into, please get in touch. We also need horror fantasy suggestions, please. We want some of that. That sounds fun. So anyway, until then, we will say goodnight, goodbye, later. Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.